The bridge of the orbital platform Iron Resolve was quiet. Frank Kelso watched the stars on the main screen. They were fixed and steady. Then they moved. It was not a ship. It was the stars themselves that shifted. 1,000 points of light slid apart, revealing the dark knife-sharp shapes behind them. A fleet. The enemy. They had been hiding in the sensor static of the nebula, using it as a cloak. Now they emerged. Every screen on the bridge flickered and died. The low hum of the ship vanished into silence. Frank's hands flew over his dead console. Nothing responded. "Report," a voice said. It was Commander Evans. She stood from her chair, her face hard. "Total system failure," Frank said. "We are blind. We're dead in the water." A young tech Leo spoke from the CUM station. His voice was thin. "The Vigilance is hailing us. Emergency channel." The main speaker crackled. A strained voice filled the silent bridge. "Iron Resolve. Confirm your status. The enemy fleet is upon you. They used you as bait." Frank felt the words like a physical blow. Their platform, the strongest in the sector, had not been a shield. It had been a piece of meat thrown to draw out the predators. The voice from the Vigilance, the command ship, grew more urgent. "Scatter. All ship's protocol Hydra is in effect. Independent action. Survive. That is your only order. Survive." Outside the viewport, the enemy ships began to fire. Silent green lances of light cut through the dark. A frigate near the Resolve exploded, a brief, ugly flower of fire and metal. The Resolve shook, a direct hit. Red emergency lights flashed on, casting long shadows. The air smelled of burning wires. "They've hit our port side," Evans said, her voice calm but loud. "Atmosphere is venting. All crew, abandon station. Get to the life pods now." The crew moved fast. Frank stayed at his post. He pulled a panel off his console. Wires and circuits glowed inside. This was a manual override. "Kelso, that's an order," Evans barked. "The pods need a chance," he said, not looking up. "The railgun has 1 round left in the chamber, can give them a hole to run through." He found the right cables. He connected them. A small targeting screen, powered by a separate battery, glowed to life. He aimed the massive gun at the center of the enemy formation. He fired. The entire platform shuddered. The railgun slug, a spear of solid metal, tore through 2 enemy cruisers. It opened a gap in their perfect line. Frank saw the pods launch, tiny silver seeds shooting away from the dying Resolve. He turned to leave. Another impact rocked the bridge. He was thrown from his feet. Evans was gone, her chair a melted ruin. He stumbled into a corridor. It was full of smoke. He found a life pod hatch. It was still open. He climbed in and hit the launch button. The pod ejected into chaos. Space was a storm of light and debris. His small scanner showed the battle. The Vigilance was fighting hard, but it was surrounded. Then he saw it. A new ship arrived. It was bigger than the others. A dreadnought. It was shaped like a blade. It ignored the other military ships. It moved straight for the Vigilance. It did not aim for the bridge or the engines. Its weapons charged, glowing with a terrible energy. They were aimed at the Vigilance's main hangar bay. The bay where the civilian evacuees from Cyrus 3 were waiting for safety. Frank's breath caught. This was not a battle. This was a culling. His pod, with no power to steer, drifted silently on its original course. It was drifting directly into the path of the massive enemy dreadnought. The pod shook violently. Bright green light filled the small window. Frank was thrown against his straps. A deep hum vibrated through the metal walls. It was a tractor beam. The enemy dreadnought was pulling him in. He was a bug caught in a jar. The pod landed with a hard clang. The hatch was ripped open from the outside. Rough hands dragged him out. He stood in a vast hangar bay. The air was cold and smelled like oil and ozone. The walls were dark metal, smooth and seamless. The soldiers around him wore black armor. Their helmets were full face, with dark visors that showed no features. They were not aliens. They were men and women, but they moved with a strange, perfect unity. They were the stalkers, enhanced humans. They saw normal people like Frank as flawed, weak. They pushed him into a line with other prisoners. He saw a few soldiers in torn uniforms, some engineers in coveralls, and civilians. A woman held 2 small children close. boy and a girl. Their faces were pale with fear. The stalkers marched them through the ship. The corridors were wide and lit by a harsh white light. They passed open doorways. Frank saw labs, saw medical tables with restraints. His stomach tightened. They were shoved into a large cell. The door slid shut with a final sound. The room was bare except for a bench and a drain in the floor. The woman with the children sank onto the bench. The boy, Leo, hid his face in her coat. The girl, Mia, stared at the door with wide eyes. A man in engineer's clothes spoke. His name was Phil. "What do they want with us? Why didn't they just kill us?" A soldier with a bloody bandage on his arm answered, "They don't waste test subjects." Frank looked at him. "Test subjects? Stories are true," the soldier said. "They test their new weapons on us. Biological agents. Nerve gases. They want to see how long we last." A silence fell over the cell. The only sound was Leo's quiet crying. Hours passed, the door opened. A single stalker guard entered. He placed a tray of food bricks on the floor. He did not speak. He turned to leave. As he turned, his belt clip caught on the door mechanism. A small multi-tool device fell from his belt. It clattered to the floor and slid under the bench. The guard did not notice. The door shut behind him. Frank did not move for a full minute. Then he slowly walked to the bench and knelt down. His fingers closed around the cool metal tool. He looked at the others. Their eyes were on him. Hope was a dangerous thing here. He moved to the cell door. He examined the control panel. It was a simple keypad with no visible seams. But he saw a small service port at the bottom. He used a thin pick from the multi-tool. He worked it into the port. A soft click echoed in the quiet room. The cell door slid open a few inches. Frank peered into the empty corridor, turned back to the soldiers. He nodded. This was their chance. He turned to lead them out. Then he stopped. Leo and Mia were standing right behind him. They had followed him. He stared at the open door, then up at his face. Their small faces were full of a terrible, hopeful fear. The alarm began to blare. A piercing, relentless sound. Red lights flashed in the corridor. Their chance was over before it began. The alarm screamed. Red light painted the walls. Frank shoved Leo and Mia back into the cell. "Get down." He turned to face the corridor. The other soldiers moved fast, pressed themselves against the wall near the door. They had no weapons, only their hands. The first stalker guard ran into view. His rifle was up. Frank moved on instinct. He grabbed the rifle barrel and pulled hard. The guard stumbled forward. Another soldier drove a fist into his helmet's neck joint. The guard choked and fell. They had one rifle. The second guard was smarter. He stopped short and raised his weapon. Frank saw the green glow of its charge. He was too slow. Then Phil, the engineer, panicked. Psst. His eyes were wide with terror. "No, don't shoot. We surrender." He shoved the two children aside to get to the front. He held his hands high. "We give up." Stalker guard did not hesitate. He shot Phil in the chest. The man fell without a sound. The smell of burned flesh filled the air. The guard's helmet visor turned, fixed on Leo and Mia. They were frozen on the floor where Phil had pushed them. Frank did not think. He put his body between the children and the rifle. The energy blast hit him in the back. Pain exploded through his nerves. It was like fire and ice. He screamed. It was not a sound of pain, but of rage. A raw animal snarl. He spun around the pain, a white-hot storm in his back. He raised the stolen rifle and fired. The shot hit the stalker in the same neck joint. The guard collapsed. For a second, everything was still. The other stalkers in the corridor paused. They had never seen this. They expected fear. They expected surrender. They did not expect a wounded man to snarl back. That second was all they needed. The other prisoners saw it. They saw Frank standing over the kids, smoke rising from his back. They saw the dead stalker. The fear on their faces changed. It became something harder, something angry. They moved as one. They poured into the corridor. They fought with hands and feet and the stolen rifle. It was not a clean fight. It was ugly and desperate. But they won. The three stalkers in the hall were down. Frank leaned against the wall. His breath came in short gasps. The pain was immense. He could feel the wet heat of his own blood soaking his suit. A woman soldier, Lisa, checked the stalker bodies. She found a data pad on one of them. She brought it to Frank. He took it. His hands shook. He pulled up a schematic of the ship, Dreadnought, labeled Chimera. He saw their location. He saw a thick red line running directly under the detention block. The main plasma conduit, he whispered. We can overload it from here. It will cause a cascade failure. It could cripple the whole ship. He looked at the faces around him. They were listening. They were with him. He traced the conduit's path on the screen. It ran to the engineering core. A massive power surge would blow it. It would also blow this entire section of the ship. He looked up from the data pad, his face grim. To save the fleet, he said, we have to blow the conduit. It will kill everyone in this block. It'll kill us. A heavy silence filled the corridor. Frank's words hung in the air. To save the fleet, they had to die. Then Lisa spoke. Her voice was flat, so we make it count. Frank nodded. He pointed to the schematic on the data pad. The explosion will create a huge power surge. We can use it. We can force open the doors to the ship's data core. It's one deck above us. He explained the rest. If they could get into the core, they could plant a virus. It's a corrosive data scrub program. It would blind the Chimera, would wreck its targeting and navigation. And if they timed the broadcast right, it would spread to the whole Stalker fleet. It's a better death, a soldier named Don Miller said. He was young, his face still soft. It's the only death that matters, Frank said. He looked at Leo and Mia. Their mother held them tight, made a new decision. Miller, your job is different. You take them. You get to this secondary pod bay. He pointed to a spot on the schematic. It's far from the blast. You get out. You tell them what we did. Miller shook his head. I should stay and fight. Frank grabbed the young man's arm. His grip was strong. This is the fight. Keeping them alive is the fight. Getting the word out is the fight. He handed Miller the data chip from the Stalker officer. The virus is on here. If we fail in the core, you get this to the Vigilance. You are our backup plan. Now go. Miller's jaw tightened. He nodded. He took the chip. He looked at the woman and her children. Come on, they moved. Frank and the others provided cover. They ran down the sterile corridors. They used service ducts and maintenance shafts. The Stalkers hunted them. They fought running battles at every intersection. The prisoners used stolen weapons and sheer desperation. They were not skilled like the Stalkers, but they were angry. They reached a wide hallway. At the end was a massive circular door, the entrance to the data core. It was sealed shut. The surge from the conduit blast should blow it open, Frank said. He looked at his small group. Only 5 of them were left. Lisa was there. 2 other soldiers, 1 wounded engineer. We hold this position, Frank said. We protect the door until the blast hits, and we go in. They took cover behind metal support columns. They aimed their rifles down the hall. The ship was quiet. Too quiet. Then they heard it. A new sound, a heavy rhythmic thud, like a machine hammering into the floor. It came from the dark end of the corridor. A shape emerged from the shadows. It was a Stalker, but bigger. Its armor was thicker, darker. Single red light glowed from its helmet. It carried a heavy cannon, to more just like it stepped out behind it. Stalker elites. The lead elite stopped, and its helmet tilted. The red light seemed to stare right at Frank. It raised its cannon. The weapon began to whine, building to a lethal charge. The elite's cannon fired. The blast tore a huge chunk from the column Frank hid behind. Metal and concrete dust filled the air. Fire, Frank yelled. Their stolen rifles felt like toys. The energy bolt sparked harmlessly against the elite's dark armor. The elites advanced. Their steps were slow and heavy. They were not in a hurry. Lisa leaned out and shot. She hit one in the helmet. It did not even flinch. The elite turned its cannon toward her. Down! Frank screamed. The blast hit Lisa's column. It shattered. The force threw her across the hall. She hit the wall and did not get up. The other 2 soldiers tried to rush them. It was a brave, stupid move. The elites cut them down without breaking stride. The wounded engineer crawled toward a control panel. A single shot from a sidearm turned him to ash. Frank was alone. He looked at the timer on his stolen data pad. 1 minute until the conduit overloaded. 1 minute until the door behind him blew open. He had to survive 1 minute. He fired his rifle until it glowed red and died. He threw it at the lead. Elite. It bounced off its chest. The elite was 10 feet away. It raised its cannon. The red light on its helmet seemed to burn brighter. Frank did the only thing he could. He ran, not away but forward. He ducked under the massive cannon barrel, slammed into the elite's legs. It was like hitting a tree. But the elite was surprised. It stumbled back a single step. Frank grabbed a grenade from the belt of a dead soldier. He pulled the pin and shoved it into a joint in the elite's hip armor. He turned and ran back toward the data core door. The explosion behind him was deafening. The elite roared in anger and pain. It was down, but not dead. Frank reached the door. The timer on his pad hit 0. A deep thrum shook the ship. The lights flickered and died. Emergency strips on the floor glowed red. The plasma conduit had blown. A massive surge of power shot through the circuits. The giant circular door in front of Frank shuddered. With a scream of tearing metal, it slid open a few feet. He had done it. He was in. He stumbled into the data core. The room was cold and filled with the hum of servers. Blue lights blinked in the dark. He saw the main interface port. He took the second data chip from his pocket, the one with the virus. This was the moment. He looked at a monitoring screen on the wall. It showed the battle outside. The Vigilance was crippled, its engines dark. The Stalker fleet was closing in. Then he saw something else. A smaller screen showed an internal camera view. It was the secondary pod bay. Miller was there. He was helping Leo and Mia into a pod. But 3 Stalker soldiers were also there. They were advancing. They raised their rifles. Miller turned to face them, his hands empty. Frank's hand froze. The virus chip was an inch from the port. He could save the fleet. He could insert the chip and blind the Stalker armada. It would be a victory. But on the screen, he saw Miller step in front of the children, just as Frank had done. He saw the Stalkers take aim. Frank's eyes moved to another screen. It showed the Chimera's weapons. The main cannon was still charged. It was still aimed at the Vigilance's refugee hangar. He had a choice, a terrible choice. Save the many or save the few. He made his decision. His hand moved from the data port. He slammed it down on the weapons control panel. He rerouted all the Chimera's remaining power, sent it to the point defense guns. On the screen, the guns swiveled. They aimed inward. They fired. The 3 Stalkers in the pod bay were vaporized. Miller and the children were safe. Frank had saved them. He had shielded the cubs, but he had lost the war. He turned back to the data port. The virus chip was still in his hand. It was too late. Alarms blared. Heavy footsteps pounded down the hall toward the open core door. Elites were coming. He had failed. Then a new voice crackled over the ship's internal comms. It was Miller. Frank, we're clear. We're away. The data chip. I have it. Frank stood in the dark core, surrounded by the enemy. He smiled a hard, thin smile. The fight was not over. It had just begun.